In this final example, we're going to take a look at a piece that I composed called Seven Seas, and this has a good bit of stuff going on in it. You can see we have brass here in the gold, we have percussion in the blue, we have Berlin woodwinds here in the turquoise or aquamarine, and then we have strings here in the fuchsia. So I'm going to play this down for you, and then we're going to go and check out what's happening in the woodwinds, and we're going to look at some different sections and really jump in here and see what's going on in this piece. A lot of stuff going on in there. Obviously, you can hear that this is a faster paced piece. It's in 7/8, which is why I named it Seven Seas. It's not very clever, but you know, there it is. And the tempo is about 170. So if we turn on the metronome here, it's cooking along pretty good. And this is kind of felt in a 2+2+3 pulse. So it's 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2, that kind of thing. What I wanted to showcase with this piece is a lot of the faster flexibility that you can do with Berlin woodwinds. A lot of the patches with the playable runs are very agile, so I wanted to really display that and create a piece that showed you kind of how that worked. So we can kind of look in the beginning here. We can hear what's going on in just the woodwinds. We have this little theme, which kind of gets handed off between the different instruments, first in flute, then in oboe, and then clarinet, and then bassoon. A little modulation here. Okay, so just this first section. If we look at the flute here, I'll try to squeeze as much as I can here into this 720 window. It will be a little squished, but you'll have to bear with me. Previously in this course, we talked about how there's this weird thing with the key switches, and it's not just Berlin woodwinds. This is in all of the libraries that I have. All of the key switches are an octave off. Everything else is correct, but for some reason the key switches are all wrong. So even though in my template here, the key switch you can see starts at C-1, they show up as C0, just like we looked at before. Anyway, so we start off here. I think I have an extra articulation. Yep, I do. That shouldn't be there. We start off here with a portato short, and hopefully you'll get this by the end here. The first 5 articulations that I have loaded into these articulations performers, starting with C0, is staccatissimo, staccato, portato short, portato long, legato, and then on F0, which is really F-1 to contact, is playable runs. Now, not all of the patches have playable runs, so I'll show you how I kind of did a workaround there. So we start off here with a portato short. That's this little pulse here. Bum. And then we go right into the playable runs. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum. Which sounds fantastic. And then we end with another portato short. Bum. Ba-da-da-da-da-dum. To save time, a lot of times what I would do is record one phrase, and then if I needed that phrase down here, I would just take this MIDI and copy it down here. I would control drag it down here, and then I would fix it. So there are some leftover key switches that you'll see in here, but disregard those. Like at the end of this phrase, there's another key switch to F0, but that's not doing anything. So we can probably get rid of that there. This is like everything else. These things are a work in progress. And we jump right into the oboe, which is a very similar thing. It runs right up here. And we have the playable runs, ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum. And then we have another portato short. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum. But I like the pulse, and I like the little space there that it left. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum, ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum. It just seemed a little bit lighter. And you can see the way I have these set up here, and we'll jump into context so you can see. You'll see a couple of these other articulations have been modified. So we said that on the D key switch, which is D0 in the MIDI, I had portato short. On some of the patches, I needed a little bit more bite. So I just linked these together here, and I put a staccato on there just to give it a little bit more punch. And you can see the playable runs patch, or the runs transition, is actually a pretty loud patch compared to the other samples. So what I could have done is adjusted the overall mic position, which I did, I think, a little bit. Everything else is at 50, but also I made sure that in the mod wheel, everything was kind of kept in check so that things were kind of balanced out. Otherwise, the runs tend to stick out a good bit more compared to the other articulations. It would have sounded like ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum, ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum. So I tried to really massage that stuff to make it as realistic as possible. I also drew in the velocity just to give me kind of a visual reference, because this run right here is playable runs patch, and the dynamics are controlled with the mod wheel. So the velocity here doesn't really do anything, but I just kind of like to have a visual reference as we're going up here to this portato short note, which is controlled by velocity. So I just kind of like to have a visual reference of where that needs to sit. And so that's why you'll see that in there sometimes as well. And also, I like to push things around just a little bit. Now, these playable runs transitions need to overlap a little bit, but you'll see everything's kind of shifted forward a tiny bit. It starts a little bit early, and that's just to give it a little bit more realism. Some of the legato stuff that we'll look at has to be kind of pushed more towards the left in order to make it sound right, to get the transitions to happen in the right spots. Same thing with the clarinet. We have the playable runs patch in there, and then that's going to another portato short, which is also combined with a staccato just to give it a little bit more bite. Now then we jump to the bassoon, which does not have a playable runs articulation. So to cheat this, I just used staccatissimo, which I know it's not exactly perfect, but that's kind of the closest articulation that matched. And I think it works just fine, so not a big deal. And then after this, we get to some grouping of instruments. So we start here as we kind of build with the orchestration and things kind of crescendo to the end of this first section. We have the first oboe with the first flute and the piccolo. And then combined with the clarinet and the bassoon in octaves. Then we have all of them together, doing a run, kind of a chordal run, if you will. You can hear how that works. We have a nice little dynamic forte piano crescendo there. And then we go into this next section where we use single 1x trills. And you can see how that's programmed here. We need the first note of the trill to happen before the trill actually happens. So we needed this between F and G. We need the F to happen before the G. And when the G lands right on the beat here, right on beat 1, that's when the trill actually starts. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. And then the same thing with this D sharp to F. Then we jump here to the runs, playable runs patch again. That's what happens in all of these flutes and piccolo, and I believe the piccolo is just an octave up. And then we have the oboe taking over the melody, and so this is a combination of a few different articulations. So we have the main A section melody here. Bum, 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 bum. And to give it a little bit more bite, this is what the articulations look like. So we have legato with a portato short. So we get the legato transitions, but we also get a nice little pulsing on each one of those notes. And then we have a portato short with a staccato, bum, bum, bum. And then the last little note is a staccato, I guess. So it's only those three articulations you see there. D0 is portato short, F sharp 0 is legato with portato short, and then C sharp 0 is going to be that staccato note. And then we jump into the next section here. We have a nice little run up here. I added the piccolo here. You can hear just what the piccolo sounds like. And that's also playable runs. And then actually, I think that's the portato long. Yep, just to give it a little bit more length. Then we just have some harmony here in the flutes. We have the melody in sixths here for most of this. And then in the clarinet, we have just the melody doubled with the clarinet to give that a little bit more strength. Because we don't need a whole lot of harmony in there to sell it that it's harmony. And another run here, this time with the oboes in there as well. Now we have a big section here where we get the brass that comes back in, and it's most of the brass here. So we have everyone just playing in unison, separated by some octaves. So we have the clarinets down here, and then on top of that, the oboes. And then we have the flutes, which I believe are in unison with the oboes. And then we have the piccolo an octave above that. And the articulations that we have in here, we'll look at what's going on in the flute. We basically have portato shorts with a staccato overlay. And then we have double tongue. So bum ba da ba da ba ba bum. Sometimes what can happen there's a little bug, which at this point in time has not been fully worked out. And that's something that happens with the trills, which we'll look at a little bit later down the road in this composition. Sometimes the trills can cause some notes to get stuck. Essentially what happens is there's a little bit of CPU spike. What I would guess is there's some kind of code running, looping in the background that stays running. And so every time there's a little glitch like that, the CPU meter in Kontakt gets falsely inflated. And so that's why occasionally you will hear some clicks. You will hear some clicks and pops because there's something weird that makes that happen. And it's not all the instruments, but some of the instruments get caught in, there's a little bit of CPU cyclage being used. Eventually, if you keep getting stuck notes, eventually what will happen is the CPU meter will build up so high that everything just starts to glitch and it's all just wonky noises. But if we look at the performance meter here in Reaper, you can see that the performance, if we play this, this is pretty much everyone playing. We're like at 22%. You know, it's not a tremendous amount, but there's that weird thing that sometimes happens. So let's keep going here. Then we have this next section here. So we have it first start with the bassoon and the clarinet. And so the articulations here are mostly going to be legato with a portato short. Again, because we're not using a different legato. We could load up legato 2 if we needed to, and we already have portato short. Adding this extra articulation doesn't use up any additional memory. And in the bassoon, we're doing some kind of faster lines, but we're again using that staccatissimo articulation there. So same thing here as we go into this second section here, a lot of the same kind of articulations. We have playable runs, we have the legato, and we have some staccato. Then we go into the second half of this piece. And this is just bassoon playing this melody line. And you can see I've drawn in mod wheel data there. And this is just using legato and legato with a portato short overlay. So it starts off this phrase with legato. So the first two have a normal legato transition. And the third one has a legato transition with just a little bit of pulse. And then we add the clarinet in here with a little harmony. Then we have another big section where the whole orchestra is playing. So we'll hear what's just going on in the woodwinds. It's that melody line all in unison. We just add a few harmony parts in here. First clarinet and the first flute. Ooh, and then we get into the trills, which is the first time that I've used this in one of these examples. These are just the normal trills. So this is not measured trills, and it's not the single trills or sforzando trills. These are just trills. There we go. So in the case of the piccolo, it's just whole tone and half tone trills. And some of these other instruments, it'll be a different trills patch. Here it's Trills Orchestrator, a half tone to a perfect fourth. And then just a little mod wheel curve down here. Same thing happens when it repeats. Kind of starts off a little bit harder. Then we go into this next section here. We have another unison melody here between most of the flutes and the lower woodwinds. But in piccolo and second flute, we have this little staccato theme here, which I originally wrote for the strings to happen over this soaring melody theme. But as I was kind of listening to it, my wife actually thought that that little portion needed to be brought out more. And so rather than jacking that up with some more strings, I turned to the woodwinds to give it a nice breathy quality to that. Also, keep in mind that sometimes when we start these phrases, we get a little bit of weirdness with some of the cymbals here. I guess I can mute that so you won't hear that, but some of these cymbal rolls are using one-shot cymbal rolls, so anytime they fire, no matter where they're positioned, it starts the sample over, which is why sometimes you'll hear when we start a phrase, there's a weird cymbal crescendo in there, but I'll mute that for now. So we have that whole thing going on, and I believe it keeps going with the strings. It's kind of in the background, but because that piccolo is so high, it really draws attention to it, but in a very subtle way. For the remainder of this composition, I turn to another flute patch here. This time it's the Flute 8VA. It's two flutes with one flute an octave higher, and then as they get into the high register, that octave higher becomes a piccolo. And so we don't have all of the articulations available to us. You can see we don't have portato short or portato long, but I cheated with a sforzando, and then I combined one of the sforzandos with a legato to get kind of a portato long effect, if you will. I use those for the remainder here because, especially for the playable runs, they have a nicer effect, I think, than using all of the flutes with the piccolo. The effect of them all together is much more convincing than using the individual instruments, especially if you're going to do a run where they're all playing. It's much easier just to use this patch, and it sounds much better, I think. I really wanted that high register to really sing, and so the Flute 8VA patch works for me a good bit better. But you can see we have kind of all the instruments doing some different things here. We have clarinets. Now I could have used the clarinet ensemble for some of these runs, but I actually felt like the ensemble nature of that, which is 3 clarinets, that didn't sound quite as snappy on the playable runs patch as individual clarinet instruments. They had just a little bit more snap and bite. So I experimented with that in here, but it didn't quite work for me. And then as we go into the final section here, we have the flutes, or the Flute 8VA patch, doing the kind of main theme melody. And then we have the other lower, the oboe, clarinet, and bassoon instruments. They're kind of doing a staccato, rhythmical harmonic support. This is all just staccato and some portato shorts, I think. Or staccatissimo, even. I think most of these are staccatissimo. And so the idea was, as we're hearing the main melody here through the last part of this piece, I wanted to kind of break it down to where we have this little choir of woodwinds just kind of doing this really nice percussive thing, and it lays the bed as the orchestration just gets out of control and crazy as it builds up, which we'll look at more of the orchestration coming up in the next part here. To end it, I just had this idea just to give a little bit of space and do just a tiny little piccolo thing all by itself before we did these bum, 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 big percussive orchestra hits at the end. So there you have it. In the next section, we're going to check out the way these different sections play together. So we're going to look at what's happening between the woodwind section and the string section, the woodwind section and the percussion, the woodwind section and the brass section, and those other kind of orchestration relationships to create the full texture and the full sound of this piece. So check that out coming up in the next section.